bhagavate vasudevaya. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Śrīmad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 30, and verse number 9. First of all, I'd like to say I feel very humbled being here. I came here the first time in 1972 when the temple was still being built. The only thing here was some of these pillars and Prabhupada's Vyasa-san, and then Prabhupada's house. Okay. And there was no place for brahmacharis to sleep, so I was sleeping on a sand dune outside here. And Prabhupada had his room, but it was very hot at that time, so he was sleeping outside with a mosquito tent. And I had the great opportunity of being able to serve Prabhupada. I was asked by his servant to fetch water from the well. There was no running water at that time. So there was a well out here somewhere, and they gave me a stick to put on my back and 2 buckets. And I went to the well and drew water out of the well and filled one bucket and the other bucket. And then I went back like this, and I gave it to the servant, and Prabhupada was there. And the servant said, "Don't go away, I'm going to give you something." He said, "Nobody else wanted to do this, you did it, so you're going to get a special gift." So he took the water into Prabhupada, and Prabhupada began to take his bath. And he came back, he said, "I just swept Prabhupada's room." And he gave me a tin can like that. He said, "This is the dust from his lotus feet." So that was very nice. And at that time, this was, Vrindavan was a small village. There were no cars. There were just tangas and some rickshaws. And, but it was very transcendental. And I remember the first thing I did was go on parikram the next morning. There was a dog here at that time that was asthmatic, and he would, all night long, he'd go like that. But he never left this compound. And we would, there was one, let's say, toilet bucket on the corner over here of the property. And after we would eat on the palm leaves, we would go and throw the leaves near the toilet, and the dog would come and lick the food. So it became clear that this dog was very special. It was definitely a Brijbasi in a previous life that must have made some mistake. And whenever Prabhupada gave a lecture here, the dog would come as close as possible to hear it. And we knew that because you could hear him going, like that, you know. And so this is a magical place, even though they've done so much building here, but it's still magical, it's still a wonderful place. It is Vrindavan, and you're very lucky to be here. I feel very fortunate to be here. I'm going to offer my obeisances to everyone and thank the leadership of this temple who are doing a great job. Give me a few minutes to talk about Prabhupada and Krishna. So, the following verse. Cūta-priyāla-panasāsana-kovidāra jambv-arka-bilva-bakulāmra-kadamba-nīpāḥ anye parārtha-bhavakā yamunā-upakūlāḥ śaṁsantu kṛṣṇa-padavīṁ rahitātmanāṁ na. cūta-priyāla-panasāsana-kovidāra jambv-arka-bilva-bakulāmra-kadamba-nīpāḥ anye parārtha-bhavakā yamunā-upakūlāḥ śaṁsantu kṛṣṇa-padavīṁ rahitātmanāṁ na. cūta-priyāla-panasāsana-kovidāra jambv-arka-bilva-bakulāmra-kadamba-nīpāḥ anye parārtha-bhavakā yamunā-upakūlāḥ śaṁsantu kṛṣṇa-padavīṁ rahitātmanāṁ na. Everybody. jambv-arka-bilva-bakulāmra-kadamba-nīpāḥ anye parārtha-bhavakā yamunā-upakūlāḥ śaṁsantu kṛṣṇa-padavīṁ rahitātmanāṁ na. cūta-priyāla-panasāsana-kovidāra jambv-arka-bilva-bakulāmra-kadamba-nīpāḥ anye parārtha-bhavakā yamunā-upakūlāḥ śaṁsantu kṛṣṇa-padavīṁ rahitātmanāṁ na. Ladies. cūta-priyāla-panasāsana-kovidāra jambv-arka-bilva-bakulāmra-kadamba-nīpāḥ anye parārtha-bhavakā yamunā-upakūlāḥ śaṁsantu kṛṣṇa-padavīṁ rahitātmanāṁ na. cūta-priyāla-panasāsana-kovidāra jambv-arka-bilva-bakulāmra-kadamba-nīpāḥ anye parārtha-bhavakā yamunā-upakūlāḥ śaṁsantu kṛṣṇa-padavīṁ rahitātmanāṁ na. cūta-priyāla-panasāsana-kovidāra jambv-arka-bilva-bakulāmra-kadamba-nīpāḥ anye parārtha-bhavakā yamunā-upakūlāḥ śaṁsantu kṛṣṇa-padavīṁ rahitātmanāṁ. Okay, so, cūta, mango creeper, priyāla, priyāla tree, a kind of śāla tree, panasa, jackfruit tree, āsana, āsana tree, a yellow śāla, kovidāra, O Kovidāra tree. Jambu. O rose apple tree. Arka. O arka plant. Bilva. O bell fruit tree. Bakula. O mimosa tree. Āmra. O mango tree. Kadamba. O kadamba tree. Nīpa. O nīpa, a smaller kind of kadamba. Ye. Who. Anye. Others. Para. Of others. Artha. For the sake. Bhavakāḥ. Whose existence. Yamunā-upakūlāḥ. Living near the bank of the river Yamuna. śaṁsantu. Kindly tell. kṛṣṇa-padavīṁ. The path of Kṛṣṇa has taken. Rahita. Who have been deprived. Artha-manāṁ. Of our minds. Na. To us. Translation by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. O cūta, O priyāla, O panasa, āsana and kovidāra, O jambu, O arka, O bilva, bakula and āmra, O kadamba and nīpa, and all you other plants and trees living by the banks of the Yamuna, who have dedicated your very existence to the welfare of others, we gopis have lost our minds, so please tell us where Kṛṣṇa has gone. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. According to Srila Jiva Goswami, the cūta is a mango creeper, whereas the āmra is a mango tree. He goes on to explain that the nīpa, though not a very prominent tree, bears large flowers, and that the gopis' desperation to find Kṛṣṇa is clearly shown by the fact that they approach the insignificant arka plant. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti gives the following information about Vrindavana trees. The nīpa is the dust kadamba, and it has large flowers. The kadamba proper has smaller flowers and a very pleasant fragrance. The kovidāra is a particular kind of kanchanara, or mountain ebony tree. Even though the arka plant is very insignificant, it always grows near Lord Gopishwara, the Shiva deity in Vrindavana or Vrindavana forest, because it is dear to him. O cūta, O priyāla, O panasa, āsana and kovidāra, O jambu, O arka, O bilva, bakula and āmra, O kadamba and nīpa, and all you other plants and trees living by the banks of the Yamuna, who have dedicated your very existence to the welfare of others, we gopis have lost our minds. So please tell us where Kṛṣṇa has gone. So this is a very interesting verse. First of all, this is all about Kṛṣṇa hiding somewhere in the forest of Vrindavan. After the rasa dance, Kṛṣṇa, during the rasa dance, although he was dancing with the different gopis, he walked away with Srimati Radharani and disappeared. And when the gopis realized this, they were devastated. And why did Kṛṣṇa walk away? Because the gopis became proud that they were having so much attention of Kṛṣṇa. So obviously, when it says, amanitvam idamitvam ahimsa santir arjavam, acharya pasamam socham staryam atma vinigraha. So the first step in spiritual education is humility. And the second step is pridelessness. So Kṛṣṇa doesn't like his devotees to become falsely proud. This is a no-no for a spiritual person. one must learn this humility. Knowledge without humility is actually going to be abusive. So the first thing we should learn is how to be humble, just like to approach a spiritual master. Tadvidi paripatena paripasnena sevaya upadeksyami te jnanam ganinas tatpadarshinaha. One should approach the bona fide spiritual master with three attitudes. That is panipat, submissiveness, paripasnena, asking significant questions, and seva, offering service to the spiritual master. And there's not just one spiritual master. There are three spiritual masters. There's the Vartma-pradakshika guru who introduces you to Krishna. There's the Shiksha guru who gives significant instructions to the neophyte. And there's the initiating guru who represents the like the bulwark, the foundation of following regulative principles and following all the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness. And according to the Srimad Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Lila, verses 35 and 47, the Shiksha and Diksha gurus are equal in importance in the life of a devotee. One can have only one initiating guru, but one can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Shiksha gurus. This is important because, especially now that the movement has grown significantly, and there are many, I would say many advanced devotees in ISKCON, and many of them are here. So you have 360 degrees of gurus, Shiksha and Diksha gurus. So there's no dearth of opportunity to learn about Krishna. And the whole goal of Krishna consciousness and to Shruti or the Vedic literature is to learn the science of Krishna. This word science is important because the definitions in most English dictionaries are incomplete or misleading. Science means fact. That means that it's not a theory. It's something that is true in all realms of existence, whether it's the material world or the spiritual world, and it is always not related to time. It's true in the past, it's true in the future, and it's true in the present. That is what science is. It's fact that cannot be altered. So therefore, when you go to these public schools or different schools, they don't really teach you science. They're teaching you mainly theories. And those theories are changing a lot also. That means that they're not fact. Everything in the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam is science. It's true in the past, it's true in the present, it's true in the future, it's true in all places, whether in the material world or the spiritual world. So the Srimad Bhagavatam is the only book in the universe, not only on the earth planet, but in the whole universe, that gives detailed information on who God is and what's going on in the spiritual world. There's no other book like this. Therefore, we don't really realize how important the Srimad Bhagavatam is, because it is the science of Krishna. And Prabhupada wanted us to learn the science of Krishna. And because Krishna is the most unique person. Brahma Bhuta Prasanna Nasochatina. I'm sorry. Krishna is the most unique person. He has the most unique qualities. He's the cause of all causes. He is never born. He never gets old. He never dies. If you go to the Sistine Chapel in Rome, you will see a picture of God on the ceiling. It's very imposing. And he's an old man with wrinkles and gray hair. That means the Pope at that time did not really understand who God is. We know that Krishna is navayovanancha. He never grows old. That's one of his transcendental qualities. You have the astagunas, and you have the 6 opulences of the Lord, and you have the Ashta-shaktis. So these are unique qualities of the Lord that maybe a few of them are shared with others, like demigods and some human beings, but none of them come close to equaling Krishna's absolute control and power of these unique qualities. So when we learn the science of Krishna, then it is an infallible science. You cannot go wrong. You cannot be defeated in any discussion. But our purpose is not to defeat people in discussions. Our purpose is to educate them. So that requires humility and patience. It's very difficult to convince people in Kali Yuga to become a genuine devotee. And even when they become devotees, it's difficult for them to maintain this high standard of following Krishna consciousness. And one time a lady told me, you know, next time our Gurudev comes, I'm going to tell him about this one person here who's a nonsense. I said, Mataji, what did you promise your Guru when you got initiated? She said, well, I promised to follow the regulative principles, chant Hare Krishna. I said, that's what you should talk to your Guru about. It's not your business to complain about something. That's why you have a temple president and temple authorities. You can tell them, and if they think it's a valid thing, then they'll explain to the Guru. But your duty is to follow the regulative principles and chant 16 good rounds minimum a day. Then your Guru will be very pleased with you. He's not going to be pleased with you if you complain about someone. So, therefore, in this Śrīmad Bhagavatam, 10th canto, chapter 30, and verse 9, that whole part of the Bhagavatam is about the gopis' extreme transcendental love for the Lord. Now this is what Lord Chaitanya was teaching when he came to this world. This is the difference between mundane spirituality and transcendental knowledge of God and the practice of pure devotional service. It means how to love God. Unless we actually love God, we have not really understood Lord Chaitanya's movement. He taught this ecstatic love of God that's so imperative and so all-encompassing that eventually you cannot think of anything else. Now we have an example of that. This is explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila, chapter 4, where it says, the pure love of the gopis has become celebrated by the name lust. The dear devotees of the Lord, headed by Sri Uddhava, desire to taste that love. Now, lust has a bad connotation in the material world, but the material world is a perverted reflection of the spiritual world. That means whatever's happening in the spiritual world, a facsimile of it happens in the material world, but it's an upside down or perverted representation of it in darkness. Now, what does that mean exactly? A reflection in darkness. It's important to understand what it is. If you're driving in a car at night and there's street lights on one side and there's darkness on two sides, in front of you and on your left-hand side, if you look through the window of the left-hand side, you'll see an image of yourself outside the window. That is a reflection in darkness. See? So there has to be darkness on one side, and there has to be some light on another side. And then there's a mirror. It's not a mirror, there's a window, but you'll see your reflection in the window. Now, is that reflection real? No. It only points to something that's real, that's you. So that is what is called a reflection in darkness, and it's a perverted reflection. Everything we see here is upside down, and it's not a correct representation of what's in the spiritual world. So in the spiritual world, what do we hear? Lust and love have different characteristics, just as iron and gold have different natures. And the purport Prabhupada says, one should try to discriminate between sexual love and pure love, for they belong to different categories with a gulf of difference between them. They are as different from one another as iron is from gold. At one time in France, we were going to purchase a property and in Paris, and this gentleman came who was a real estate agent. And he was a very, very unique person. Whenever he would speak, he would punctuate his speaking with like that. I don't know why he did that, but he did that over and over again. So we didn't want to insult him in any way, but I've never met a person like that before in my life. So anyway, I wanted to help him, so I showed him a picture of in Srimad Bhagavatam of Sukadeva Goswami, who was naked, and he was walking past, I guess the Yamuna River, and there were a lot of ladies or gopis in the water bathing, and they were naked, and then Vyasadeva was following him. And I showed this to this gentleman, right? And he had a fixation on that picture. And I asked him, it went on for about a minute, and I said, "Sir," I said, "what are you seeing?" He said, "Oh, this is real spirituality." I said, "But what are you seeing?" He said, "This is what I want." I said, "Okay, but what are you seeing?" He said, "Well, the ladies are nude and that boy is nude. That's what I want." I said, "No," I said, "you're not seeing it correctly." Now you see, what actually happened there? In Sanskrit, there's a word for philosophy. And in English, there's a word for philosophy. It's philosophy. It's made up of two Greek words. And it means the love of wisdom. But in Sanskrit, it's completely different. The word for philosophy is darshan, how you see. So a mother sees her child with love and protection. A child molester looks at the same child and sees an object for exploitation. Two people looking to the same thing have two different understandings. So that is true then. The real word for philosophy is darshan. So here is this man, he's seeing this, actually a transcendental picture of a pure devotee, Sukadeva Goswami, and the gopis, who, when they saw that Vyasadeva was behind them, they hid their nakedness right away, because Vyasadeva was a grihastha, and they're supposed to differentiate between this body and that body. Whereas when the gopis saw Sukadeva Goswami, they did not see a person, they saw a person who did not discriminate, who wasn't seeing the body, but was seeing rather the soul, and also the presence of Paramatma. So this is what Prabhupada saw also when he came to New York, into the lower Manhattan, the Bowery, one of the worst places in the United States. I unfortunately was there a little bit later after Prabhupada came. That was the most degraded place, full of perverts. But he didn't see that. What he saw was, he saw something he was surprised at. He didn't think that he would see people sleeping in the streets, but he saw them in the Bowery, and he saw a lot of young kids that were taking drugs and ruining their lives. And but actually, what he saw was that they had Krishna in their heart, and they have eternal soul and an eternal relationship with Krishna. And in a miraculous way, starting with nothing, he was able to build up this big building. And his first students were all basically hippies and people that were engaged in all the four, breaking the four regulative principles and determined to do that. But he was able to convince them to become devotees. Now this is a miracle. How do I know it's a miracle? Because in 1996 I organized a centennial program for Prabhupada's 100th anniversary, and it was in San Jose. But at that time there was a large community of devotees from ISKCON who converted to Gaudiya Math, and we allowed that the main speaker would be Govinda Das, the main disciple of Sridhar Swami, but after Sridhar Swami disappeared. And at that time, when Govinda Maharaj came, we respected him, and he began his speech. And he said, "Today I have come here to do what you people do. That is, I'm going to make a confession. You do that in your religion, is it not?" And everyone went, "Yes." So he said, "I'm going to make a confession." He said, "When we heard about your Guru Maharaj, your Prabhupada, that he went to America and he was making so many devotees, Americans, into Vaishnavas, we couldn't believe it. My Gurudev and I sat here in Navadvip, and we heard these things, but it was very hard for us to believe it." Now, why did he say that it's hard to believe? Because in the 1930s, Bhan Maharaj was sent by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and he funded him for almost 4 years to stay in London and preach. And there were two other devotees. One went to Germany, and the other went, I think, to Germany also, I'm not sure. And all three of them failed. And when they came back, Bhan Maharaj openly said to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, "Your process doesn't work," which is very insulting. And nobody tried to go to the United States or to the West after that. Nobody in the Gaudiya Math. It was only Prabhupada who went through tremendous travails to come to the United States, having 2 heart attacks, being almost murdered by some crazy hippie who took LSD. He was staying with him. His copy, his manuscript of the Bhagavad Gita that he wanted printed was stolen. His typewriter was stolen. He was struggling. And sometimes he was thinking of going back to India, but he decided he was going to stay somehow or other. But he had complete faith in Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and in Krishna. So because of that complete faith and determination to basically do the duty that he was given of spreading Krishna consciousness in the Western world, he tolerated so many things, and all of a sudden there was the Hare Krishna explosion. And this was a miracle. Why? Because he was empowered by the parampara and his guru to do it, because he had absolute faith. The position of a devotee is determined by how much faith they have in Krishna, in Radha and Krishna, and in the acharyas, and ultimately in Krishna, the Supreme Personality Godhead. So, therefore, they were flummoxed. They were confused. How did he do it? So then Govinda Maharaj said, "So today I've come to make a confession that after my Gurudev left, I became the leader of the movement, our mat, And eventually I started going to the West, and I saw with my own eyes what Prabhupada did. But I have to admit, I still couldn't believe it. How could he do such a thing in such a difficult place? And he said, now this is my confession. All we are doing is just eating the remnants of your Prabhupada. That was an amazing statement that he made. He was very humble, and he was sincere about that. So, although there might be some differences, but a gentleman like that made such a statement about Prabhupada actually influenced me to have a different view of things. Then I realized Prabhupada is a genuine genuine pure devotee of the Lord, not by any votes, but by his actions. And back in 1972 here, I was here for Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja offering, and the main guest was Ban Maharaj. Ban Maharaj has a big property, or he did have a big property across the street. Prabhupada was wanting to convince him to give that property to Prabhupada so he could expand Krishna consciousness. He never did that. And he was the one that told Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, your process doesn't work. And now Prabhupada was building this big temple across the street from his place, and there were so many devotees here. Almost all of them were Western devotees. His so-called white elephants. And Ban Maharaj was sitting there, and he was definitely a very stately, very, very imposing person. He looked something like Aurobindo. You could tell he was highly educated and a gentleman. And then Gargamuni Maharaj came. He came, and Bhavananda and other sannyasis from Mayapur. And Gargamuni Maharaj got up to speak. And he began to say in very, very, let's say, emphatic ways. He said, Srila Prabhupada is the only disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur that had the faith and determination to spread this movement throughout the world. Nobody else was able to do it. Now, when he said that, immediately I looked at Ban Maharaj to see how he was going to react to that. But he was stoic. He didn't battle an eyelash, you know. But Gargamuni Maharaj didn't stop. He kept going forward with more and more emphatic statements, glorifying Prabhupada and emphasizing how he was the only one in the whole Gaudiya Math that actually was able to spread this movement. And because he had complete faith and love for his Guru Maharaj, and he was empowered to do it because of that faith. So now we see that faith is the number one thing that will determine who we are in Krishna consciousness. Faith in Guru and in Krishna. That's the bulwark, that's the foundation of our whole life. So at one point, it was Ban Maharaj's turn to speak. And I was like a little bit embarrassed. I was thinking, why is he speaking so emphatically, you know? It's like, he's like punching him in the mouth or something, you know? So, but I looked at Prabhupada also, and Prabhupada was happy. He was enjoying it, you know? So, when Ban Maharaj spoke, he spoke in a very, let's say, tight-lipped way. And he said that, well, of course, we cannot deny that your Prabhupada has done very meritorious service in the Western world. That's about all he said. And you could tell he was disturbed by the whole thing, right? I looked at Prabhupada, he was smiling. So you see what happens in life. Everybody has a chance. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur gave that duty not just to Prabhupada, he gave it to many of his leading disciples, but they were not able to do it. Of course, that doesn't mean they're bad. They just did not have the, let's say, level of faith that Prabhupada did. They also have done meritorious things. They have mats, they have devotees, and we should always be very respectful of them. But we have to understand the uniqueness of Srila Prabhupada. That is what's going to determine our spiritual life also. Our determination to be always loyal to Prabhupada and the Vaishnava Acharyas. Now, what does that mean, that loyalty? That means to be an effective preacher, all you have to do is just repeat what Krishna has said and what the Acharyas have also validated and said, and what Srila Prabhupada has said. You don't have to make up anything. You don't want to be like Gandhi. Gandhi writes a commentary on Bhagavad Gita and says it's all about nonviolence. What? Nonviolence? How can you say that? The whole thing is about violence, right? But justified violence. So you see, this is going on. And Prabhupada said, why are they piggybacking on the Bhagavad Gita? Why doesn't he write his own book and talk about nonviolence? No, they want to use the Bhagavad Gita to get the attention of the people, and then they give their own opinion. So this is complete nonsense. And Prabhupada said, my only qualification is I simply repeated what my Guru Maharaj told me, and I never made anything up. I never speculated in any way. I simply have repeated the words of the Acharyas and Prabhupada and Krishna. So here it says, talking about the gopis again, the desire to gratify one's own senses is kama, lust. But the desire to please the senses of Lord Krishna is prema, love. If there is ample reason for the dissolution of a conjugal relationship, and yet a dissolution, or in other words, a divorce, does not take place, such a relationship of intimate love is called pure. So this is the thing about relationships. We can only define or find out who we are through relationships. If we live in a vacuum, it would be difficult to understand who we are. Just like when Brahma first appeared, he couldn't understand who he is. He didn't see his origin. The creation hadn't taken place yet. He went through the whole stem of the flower, and it was all darkness, and he came back on the whorl of the lotus flower, and then he heard tapa. Now, because he had a previous life, he understood what that meant. It meant austerity. So he began a severe austerity. And actually, if you read the Bhagavatam, he meditated for 311 trillion 40 billion years. That's his lifespan. He meditated, and after that, then he had his lifespan also. So look how long he meditated in order to be able to hear Krishna's flute and be enlivened and understand something about the spiritual world and understand his duty in the material world. Now, today, we don't have to meditate 311 trillion years, because Lord Chaitanya made this movement very easy. All you have to do is chant Hare Krishna sincerely and follow the regulative principles and preach this knowledge, this transcendental knowledge, and take prasadam and dance ecstatically and go in Sankirtan, and you go back to Godhead. What could be easier than that? When the karmis want to enjoy, what do? They sing, they dance, they eat food, and of course they talk nonsense, but they're singing and dancing, right? So this is Lord Chaitanya's movement. He made it easy for everyone to go back to Godhead. And plus, there are special things in Kali Yuga. They're called dispensations or perks, things that are special about this age. They're actually good. Now, Kali Yuga is the worst time to live. That's why these special dispensations have been given by the Lord. What are they? Number one, previously, if you thought about doing something good, you didn't get the result. You would have to actually do it. And then secondly, previously, if you thought about doing something bad, you immediately got the karmic reaction, whether you did it or not. Number three, Rajan Astihi Eka Mahadguna Kirtanadeva Krishnasya Mukta Sangasya Jayate. Simply by chanting Hare Krishna sincerely, you can go back to Godhead. And number four, Nahabikramanastasti Pratijayana Vidyate Swapam Apyasya Dharmasya Chayate Mahato Bhayat. Whatever you do in Krishna consciousness remains an eternal asset. If you do 1% in this life, next life you begin at 2%. That's if you get a human body, right? But you will, because you did devotional service. So you cannot be a loser in Krishna consciousness. It's not like the material world. Everybody is a loser in the material world. Everyone gets old, they get sick, and they die, right? And then they're born again, and to repeat that. So everything is made by Lord Chaitanya, who is most merciful because he's a combination of Radha and Krishna. It's not just Krishna, it's Radha and Krishna. He's made it easy for us to be Krishna conscious. And Prabhupada, once he said something, he said, I don't understand, he said, this process is so easy and so pleasant. Why don't they just accept it so quickly? They're reluctant to accept this. And that was right. And one time I asked Prabhupada, I said, why did you come to the United States? He said, well, first godbrother went to England, another godbrother went to Germany. First one failed, second one failed. I thought, let me fail in a different place. He actually said that. So that shows his ultimate, humility. But he didn't fail because he never deviated from his guru's instructions and never had a doubt about what he was doing. And he prevailed. So that is what we have to learn to do. Have so much faith in our spiritual master and Krishna that we have a one-track mind to spread this movement to every person in every country in the world. And by the way, Kali Yuga is the best time for a preacher, because almost everybody you meet doesn't know anything about Krishna. So if you're a preacher, this is a wonderful time, because you can preach 24 hours a day all over the world, and it's unending, the bliss you can experience in seeing people become Krishna conscious. Okay, so then it says here in the purport, the predominated gopis were bound to Krishna in such pure love. For them, there was no question of sexual love based on sense gratification. Their only engagement in life was to see Krishna happy in all respects, regardless of their own personal interests. They dedicated their souls only for the satisfaction of the personality of Godhead, Shri Krishna. There was not the slightest tinge of sexual love between the gopis and Krishna. Well, now there is a difference between love or sex in the material world and the transcendental so-called sex in the spiritual world. Because the material world is just a perverted reflection of the spiritual world. There's actually pure sexual relationships in the spiritual world. But what does that mean exactly? It means that in the spiritual world, there's no personal motive. The only motive is to please Krishna. So the gopis, they say the following: now, whatever affection we see the gopis show for their own bodies, know it for certain to be only for the sake of Lord Krishna. The selfless love of Godhead exhibited by the gopis cannot have any parallel. We should not, therefore, misunderstand the carefulness of the gopis in their personal decoration. The gopis dressed themselves as beautifully as possible just to make Krishna happy by seeing them. They had no ulterior desire. They dedicated their bodies and everything they possessed to the service of Sri Krishna, taking it for granted that their bodies were meant for his enjoyment. They dressed themselves with the understanding that Krishna would be happy by seeing and touching them. The gopis think, I have offered this body to Lord Krishna. He is its owner, and it brings him enjoyment. Krishna finds joy in seeing and touching this body. It is for this reason that they cleanse and decorate their bodies. Now this is incomprehensible, because in this world there is Purusha and Prakriti. Prakriti is what is enjoyed, and Purusha is the enjoyer. But the understanding of Purusha and Prakriti is confused in the material world. Like, for example, Krishna is the ultimate Purusha, and we are all Prakriti. The so-called men and women, we're both Prakriti. But today, the men want to be Purusha and exploit and enjoy the women. And now there are women that want to be Purusha and subordinate the men. So everything is mixed up here in this material world. One time Prabhupada told me, he said, in this Kali Yuga, everything is backwards. And he was right. We are all Prakriti, whether you're male or female, and we are meant to give enjoyment to Krishna, not to exploit each other. So this is, now we see that the love of the gopis and the so-called transcendental sex in the spiritual world has nothing to do with plumbing or with reproduction, because they're all eternal. They don't have to reproduce. So the ecstasy in the spiritual world is pleasing Krishna. This is the only thing the gopis are thinking about. And therefore it says, the love of the gopis nourishes the sweetness of Lord Krishna. That sweetness in turn increases their love, for they are greatly satisfied. The happiness of the abode of love is in the happiness of the object of that love. This is not a relationship of desire for personal gratification. So to understand, here we have all this information now. What are we going to do with it? Prabhupada spent so much time writing his books and putting, actually his purports, he said, were his spiritual ecstasies. And you can feel it. You can just by hearing this, you can feel it. Not only he's telling the truth, but it's ecstatic, and it's completely different from what people understand in this world. So we should be overwhelmed with this and do everything possible to spread this message and spread Prabhupada's books and preach and spend the rest of our life just doing this. It takes time to understand the importance of Krishna consciousness and how relevant it is to this world. This is the only movement that has the knowledge and the organization to make people happy. But unless we follow the rules and regulations strictly, it'll never happen. You cannot be a phony, simply mouthing words. We have to have a very strong sadhana and very sincere chanting and very, very dedicated, let's say, preaching to spread this movement massively. Lord Chaitanya did not really preach in public. He just did ecstatic sankirtan and massive food distribution. Those are the two astras of Vaishnavas. We don't have tanks and guns and machine guns and so forth. We have prasadam and we have Harinam Sankirtan. That should be, as you're doing here, increased, but massively all over the world. And then we'll see if 1% of the population becomes Krishna conscious, the whole world will become Krishna conscious. So it's not an impossible task. We can do it. What we don't need is people who deviate from strictly following the regulative principles. So now I'm going to say a few things about Bhismastami. What do you call it? Bhisma-astami. So this Bhisma-astami it happens during the Uttarayana period. That is when the sun goes from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere, and you have Makara Sankranti that takes place, and then Vasant Panchami that takes place, and then the Bhisma Astami, the day that Bhisma chose to go back to Godhead. Now for 58 days he was stuck on the earth by the arrows of Arjuna, and during that time the battle was still going on. He was knocked out of the battle on the 10th day, and of course there were 18 days, and after that the obsequies, all the funerals for everyone. And so he just waited, pinned down like that, and by the time they came to talk to him, he basically didn't have any flesh or blood. He was just bone, but he was still alive because he's a Maha Yogi. And why did he wait like that? Because Krishna had a plan. He wanted to glorify Bhisma Dev, because he went through a lot of suffering, and he acted out of duty even though he knew he was on the wrong side. He also had great love for the Pandavas, and he actually told Arjuna how Arjuna could kill him. He gave him the knowledge. He said, keep Skandi in front, I will not do anything, and you can kill me easily. Now, these are transcendental pastimes. It's hard to understand. And Duryodhana understood, that Bhisma was he was too close to the Pandavas, so he complained to him. He said, my dear father, he said, you're not fighting seriously. I want you to fight seriously. You're prejudiced. He said, well, okay, but Bhisma Pitamaha was he was a warrior. He was so therefore, when someone challenges him, that gets his anger going. So he said, you want me to kill him? He said, yes. He said, okay, here are 5 arrows. I have invested them with supernatural power. I will kill the 5 Pandavas tomorrow. So Duryodhana said, well, let me have those 5 arrows. I'm going to hold them, make sure nothing happens to them. I said, okay. So that night, the culture of the Kshatriyas is that they fight during the day, and they'll sit down together and be jolly at night, and forget that they're going to kill each other the next day. So Krishna told Arjuna, you have to go tonight and see Duryodhana. He said, why? Why should I go see him? He said, no, Bhisma has given him 5 arrows that he's going to use to kill you and your brothers. You must get those arrows away from him. Oh, he said, okay. So he goes to Duryodhana's camp, and Duryodhana is something like, he's completely different, right, at night. He said, Arjuna, I'm so happy to see you. Come on in, sit down, have some prasad. Let's talk. You want me to stop this battle? You want to call peace? Arjuna said, no, I didn't come for that reason. He said, okay, but what do you want? So I'll give you whatever you want. He said, yes, thank you very much. I want those 5 arrows. He said, what? You want the 5? He was thinking, how did he know about it? Well, because Krishna is in the heart of everyone as Paramatma. So he gave him the arrows. He was a Kshatriya, and they had rules at that time. Nowadays there are no rules, very few rules in war, but that time there were rules. So he gave him the arrows. So then Duryodhana was really upset, and he talked to Bhisma Pitamaha. He said, look, Arjuna came and I had to give him the arrows. Then Bhisma Pitamaha understood right away this was Krishna's plan. he said, don't worry, he said, I'm going to fight to my maximum ability. And the only thing that can stop me from killing Arjuna and his brothers is if Krishna breaks his vow. He made a vow that he would not fight or use any of his weapons. So Duryodhana was pleased to hear that, and he didn't think that Krishna would break his vow. So he was happy. He was sure that Bhisma would kill them anyway. So the battle started, and Bhisma was ferocious, and he almost did kill Arjuna, and he wounded Krishna. But those were wounds of love. They were not actually malicious wounds, and Krishna accepted them. And his body was smeared with so-called blood. And at one point, the chariot was broken, and it looked like Arjuna was going to be killed. And Krishna got really upset, and he ran off the chariot, and his chadar fell off, and you could see the blood and the sweat and the dust on his body. And he picked up the wheel of the broken wheel of the chariot, and he ran toward Bhisma to kill him. And Bhisma dropped his arms and he said, see, you love your disciple so much that you have broken your vow. So that was his point with Duryodhana. He said, if he breaks his vow, then I can't do anything. So Krishna he's Bhaktavatsala. He loves his devotee, even if he has to break his vow. And therefore it's said in the Bhagavad Gita that in the first chapter, 37th, 38th verse, an obligation is binding when the effect is good. But when the effect is bad, then no one can be bound. This is what Arjuna said to Krishna, and this was one excuse he had to not fight, because he said, if I fight, I'm going to kill the other side of my family, and if I lose, this side of the family dies, I don't see how I'll be happy, therefore I refuse to fight. But he said, and I refuse to follow the culture of a Kshatriya. So anyway, Krishna did not accept that, and he insisted that Arjuna fight, and Arjuna eventually did fight. But when Bhisma was on his, let's say, his deathbed, Krishna wanted Bhisma to be glorified, and therefore everyone came, and especially Yudhisthira. Krishna tried to convince Yudhisthira, and Vyasadeva tried to convince Yudhisthira to become the king, and he refused. He didn't accept their preaching. But when he came to see Bhisma, and this was Krishna's plan to glorify Bhisma, Bhisma spoke to him the Vishnu Sahasranam Sutram. He spoke to him about Varnashram Dharma. He spoke to him about Raja Dharma. He spoke to him so many wonderful things, and convinced him to become the king. He did something seemingly that even Krishna or Vyasadeva weren't able to do, and therefore Bhisma became glorified. So these are transcendental pastimes, and Prabhupada has given great explanations of these things. We should take advantage of it. So what time is it now? 10 after. And when I should stop? Yes?
If you have something burning you want to say?
I have something else I want to talk about. This is 24 hours with Srila Prabhupada, but it won't last 24 hours. All right. When I first met Srila Prabhupada, I invited him to come to Paris, and he went first to Moscow, and then from Moscow he came to Paris. Before he came, śaṁsantu sent me a letter, and he said, do something wonderful for Prabhupada. Say that you are the new representative of the Beatles, and go to Pathé Marconi. That was the biggest entertainment company in Paris. And tell them that you are the Beatles' new manager, and the Beatles are going to come and get the Olympia Theater. Olympia Theater is right in the center of Paris, and it's a gigantic place. You can fit 2,000 people in it. And So I said, okay, I'll try. So I did go. I got an appointment to see the director of Pathé Marconi on the Champs-Élysées, and I went there. At first they wouldn't let me in because they thought I was some vagabond or something, you know. But eventually I convinced them, and they did have it on record that I was going to come. So when I met the man, I told him exactly what Śaṁsantu told me to say, and he believed me. And then he called up the director of the Olympia Theater, and the Olympia Theater director said, well, send him over, I'll talk to him. So I went to the Olympia Theater, dressed like a devotee, and with shaved head and everything. And I convinced him that the Beatles are coming, and that Prabhupada is their guru. And there'll be, you know, 2,000 or 3,000 people going to want to see, you know, the Beatles. And they believed me. And they put it on their big outdoor, you know, lighted sign and everything. Thursday night, the Beatles and the guru of the Beatles are coming, and so forth. And it got into the newspapers, and we only had like 3 days to advertise it, but you know, how we're going to advertise, we just went out on Sankirtan, we printed a little piece of paper like this and handed it to people. So, Prabhupada came, and when I first saw him, I was overwhelmed, and I realized I had made a mistake. I thought he was someone like Jesus Christ, that I was a Christian. But when I met him, I realized he's much greater than Jesus. Very humble, very, very gentle, and very, very, like, instructive. Everything he said was an instruction to us that were monumental. So anyway, I'm going to go very quickly now. He did go and give that lecture at the Olympia Theater. Hardly anybody came. And I had to translate it, although I didn't know French very well. And he told me, I'll speak very slowly and short sentences, and you just translate that. I said, okay. Anyway, fast forward, the program was over, and we chanted, we gave out some prasadam, about, I think, 20 or 30 people came. But that's all right. And so we were standing outside, in the morning of that day, we didn't have any money. And I was really worried, what are we going to do? So I came early into our little temple, and I was chanting my rounds, and I saw a brown bag on the ground, on the floor. So I walked past about 10 times, and then I said, I wonder what this is. So I picked it up, I opened it up, and it had a whole bunch of money in it. And this was a miracle. We did not even have money to buy flowers or buy boga that day. We had just moved into this building. And so I hid it underneath my arm and my chadar, hoping that, you know, I was thinking, what, if a person comes and asks me, did I see that bag? I was wondering, what am I going to say? Am I going to lie or am I going to tell the truth, right? So, but nobody came. So by 11 o'clock, we had to go to the airport by 1 o'clock. I started giving out the money, and people, some of the devotees went to buy flowers and boga. We were able to get a taxi to go to the airport. I mean, we were thinking we could hitchhike to the airport and somehow or other hitchhike back with Prabhupada. With the, of course, that would be like horrible. But so anyway, at 12 o'clock at night, after the program, we're standing outside trying to get a taxi for Prabhupada. And I knew Prabhupada was tired because he came from Moscow that morning. And I said to Prabhupada, would you like to sit here? This was an outdoor cafe. And he said to me, what do they do in this cafe? I said, well, you know, they serve people food and drinks. He said, drinks? He said, is it liquor? I said, yeah, and there's liquor and there's coffee. He said, Guru cannot sit in such a place. I was like overwhelmed by that. And he said, Guru cannot sit in such a place. So he stood there, and he got back to the temple, and we got back to our temple at 1 o'clock, and I asked śaṁsantu, I said, how are we going to get up in the morning? He said, yeah, it's going to be difficult. Well, why don't you sleep in, we'll all sleep in a little extra tomorrow morning. I said, oh, okay. So we all took rest, and then in the morning, around Mangala Arati, someone came up and punched me in the stomach, on my ribs, and said, Prabhupada is really angry. Nobody came to Mangala Arati. You better get downstairs right away. And I was shocked. And I ran down as fast as I could, and Prabhupada was there, and then they had just started Arti, and everyone was looking at me, giving me dirty looks. And I was thinking to myself, oh my God, what have I done? And then after the Arti, Prabhupada walked out, they didn't talk to me. But then śaṁsantu came and said, look, you have to come outside. Prabhupada wants to take a walk, he wants you to be on the walk. I said, okay. So I ran outside, and now Prabhupada was walking very quickly. It was early in the morning, the sun was just coming up. I was to this left side, and on the right side was the east, where the sun was coming up. And the sun was shining in such a way on his head and his body, it looked like he was Surya. You know, I was like amazed by what I was seeing. And he was walking with his cane and was going, chick, 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 chick. And he stopped. And he just stood there, and śaṁsantu and myself and Aravinda, we were behind him. And he said, śaṁsantu, why are all the grihastas in Maya? You know, well, I was a brahmachari, so it didn't hit me so hard, but you know, he was grihasta. And śaṁsantu didn't say anything. And Prabhupada waited, and he said, and then he turned around and put his cane on the ground again, and he said, yes, he said, this is their position. He said, when I first came to America, my plan was just to make sannyasis.
What?
Just to make sannyasis. He said, but then I realized this was not possible. So then I thought, this is him speaking, right? He said, then I thought, let them get married, husband and wife. Husband gives wife one son, wife goes to Vrindavan, husband becomes sannyasi. So I looked at śaṁsantu, his face sort of dropped, right? And he said, but then I understood this is not possible. So then I thought, let them chant Hare Krishna, Krishna will take care. So then he started walking again, chick, 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 and he stopped. And he said, you see this house? There was a nice house there. He said, there's first-class gentleman that lives in this house. Because there was an iron grid fence. He said, only top-class people have fence like this. And he said, look at the windows. They were French windows, right? He said, these are first-class paka windows. He said, the man that lives in this house, everything is paka for him. He says, it's good, but it's too good. When he said that, you know, like we were a little shocked. You know, what does he mean, too good? He said, this man is enjoying wealth and sense gratification. So when he dies, he'll become a rat in the same house. When he said that, the way he said it was devastating. And we were all holding our breath, you know, because, you know, he was talking about how great this place is, and all of a sudden he says, the man is going to become a rat because of his attachment. So then he started walking again, and he stopped, and he said, Hari Vilas, is it a fact that in your French country, they are so interested in wine and women? Now I was in a dilemma here, because if I said yes, that means I knew about it. and I might be doing it. If I said no, that means I was an idiot. So I just kept my mouth shut. So he said, yes, aho griha chatra sutabda vitayar janasyamohayam aham mameti. He said, people in this age, they are simply grihas, grihametis. They only think about, I am this body, this is my family, this is my house, this is my children, this is my relatives, this is my money. Janasyamoha aham mameti. And they're thinking, I, me, and mine. This, at that point I realized everything he said was to instruct us. Every little aspect of his speaking was to instruct us in a very emphatic way and very quickly so we could understand what this Krishna consciousness is about. And then he continued walking again. Now we were going back to the temple. It was the morning rush. There were cars coming by, whiz, 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 like that. And we were walking up a hill right toward the temple, and all of a sudden Prabhupada stopped. And he stood there in this morning traffic on the sidewalk, and he was quiet, and he was holding his cane on the ground, and his head was going like this. I was right behind him, and he said, oh, this breeze, it is just like Vrindavan. When he said that, I felt like a heat coming into my body, and I suddenly realized Srila Prabhupada was experiencing Vrindavan in this French, French city, and that he was elevating us to this vision that he was seeing Krishna and seeing Vrindavan and experiencing it, and he was giving us a glimpse of it. It was overwhelming. And I suddenly realized, Prabhupada is a transcendental person. He's not an ordinary person. And he's seeing things that we don't see. And he's trying to give us a chance to see these same things. So that was so overwhelming. And at one point, we almost got back to the temple. And I said to him, Prabhupada, I think we'll be able to support this temple. I'm going to start a business. He said, your business, you are a brahmachari, your business is to do sankirtan and preach. Don't do anything else. And he said, if there's some grihasta, they can do business, but your business is to follow the rules and regulations, chant and preach. So that was very enlightening for me. And when we got back to the temple, he began to sing the sadarshans, or not sadarshans, he began to sing beautiful bhajans, and he preached, and then he left. And I was overwhelmed. And when he left, I cried for a long time. Not because I was sad, I cried because I was happy that I had this short but very, very intense relationship and experience with Srila Prabhupada. So thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Are there any questions? Yes. Go.
That morning that you slept in that morning,
yes,
and then went on that morning walk, is that the same morning walk where you asked Srila Prabhupada about the meaning of the verse that says, what is night for all beings?
Yeah, that happened when we were driving in the taxi to the temple. I was sitting next to him. I had my Bhagavad Gita with me, and I had written down different things in my Bhagavad Gita that I would ask Prabhupada if I ever met him. So I took it out and I asked him about that verse in the Bhagavad Gita, and it says that what is night for the master people is daytime for the introspective stage, and what is what is daytime for the regular people is nighttime for the introspective stage, and what is nighttime for the materialistic people is daytime for the, or is introspective for the devotee. So I asked him, I said, Prabhupada, what does this verse mean? And he thought, he only heard me say, you know, what is daytime for the mass of people. So he said, no, he heard it was nighttime. And so he said, yes. He said, our devotees wake up 4 o'clock in the morning. So obviously he didn't hear why, because there was a lot of noise. There were so many cars at that time blowing their horns. And then śaṁsantu said, no, Prabhupada, he's talking about this verse. And at that point he said, oh, and he smiled. He said, this verse means that when the materialists or the karmis see us, they are laughing. They think we're wasting our time doing sankirtan, chanting and dancing, that we have given up being responsible in life. And when we see them in their cars and they're all rushing to work and they're smoking and drinking and all these different things, we're laughing because they're wasting their life. He said, so you see, they're laughing at us, we're laughing at them, but our laugh is best. That was his answer. So, thank you for asking that question. Any other questions? Yes.
You were mentioning how in Kali Yuga we have different benefits.
Yes.
That there's no loss of premonition. So my question is, what about in other ages? If you did, you would lose in whatever spiritual progress you made?
What I understand is those are special things of Kali Yuga. But the Bhagavad Gita is, you know, spoken originally 120 million years ago. It's the same Bhagavad Gita. So that one thing probably was active in the past. But it's very, very significant in Kali Yuga because it proves that you can never be a loser in Krishna consciousness. Right. So to answer your question, the same Bhagavad Gita was spoken to Vilas as it's being spoken to Arjuna. So that was in the Bhagavad Gita in the past also. Okay?
No, I didn't hear you.
Okay. Bhagavad Gita is spoken originally to Vilas 120 million years ago. So what the Bhagavad Gita Arjuna heard 5,000 years ago was the same thing spoken 120 years ago. So that verse was there previously.
So it's not just Kali Yuga?
It's not just Kali Yuga, no. But it is very significant for us because you can never be a loser. Any other questions?
Just take one more.
Okay. Anybody else? If not, we will. Yes.
Sure.
So you mentioned about Vishnu-Dhamma. Vishnu-Dhamma was on 12 Mahajans, but it was still on the side of Adharma. It was not on the side of Krishna. So was it Krishna's arrangement to perform transcendental pastimes with Vishnu-Dhamma that he would be on the side, the other side, other side?
You see, Bhisma Pitama, he was one of the 8 Vasus, and he was the person who stole a cow from a great Mahayogi, and all of them stole the cow, but he was the one who actually pulled the cow away. So because of that, he had to go through a whole lifetime of misery. The other 7, because they participated in that, They were born, and immediately Ganga threw them into the Ganges, and they went back to being demigods. But Bhisma, because he actually touched the cow and pulled it, he had to suffer his whole life. Right? And he made a vow, so that his father could marry Satyavati. He made a vow that he would never become the king, and never have any children, and never be married. So therefore, even at one point when Satyavati asked him to procreate, because two of there was no husband left. Two of them died, and he refused. He said, "Look, for you to get married, I had to promise that I would never get married and never have any children. So how can you ask me now to procreate with someone? I won't do it." So his name is Bhisma. Bhisma means someone who has taken a very severe vow that he'll never get married, and he'll always protect the Kuru dynasty, right? So he knew that Duryodhana was going to lose the battle. He knew it. But he was duty-bound to protect and fight on his side. So when you come to the point where he no longer has any skin and blood, he's just bone, he's waiting to leave his body, he spoke the truth. And the question is, why couldn't he have spoken like this before? He said, because at that time before, because he was living under the let's say, shelter of Duryodhana, he was eating the food. But now, he no longer had any body, no more intestines or anything, and no more blood, so he could speak the truth. He was not influenced by the food of Duryodhana, and he could speak openly what the truth is. So he was glorified eternally. What it was, the Bhisma Astami, it's glorification of Lord Bhisma, and so you see, he was duty-bound, but that did not mean that he was really on the side of Duryodhana. He was just doing his duty. Now, when an obligation is negative and you can hurt someone, you should not do it, although you make a vow. And that's in the case of this one sadhu who had made a vow to always speak the truth. So one day there were these dacoits that stole things from a king, and they were taking shelter in the sadhu's ashram. And then when the king's soldiers came to arrest the dacoits, they arrested the sadhu also, because he was in the same place. And so therefore, before they came, they got caught, the dacoits asked the sadhu, they said, "You have a vow to tell the truth. Tell us where the neighbors in this vicinity that are rich, where are they hiding?" And he kept his vow to tell the truth, and because of that, they killed those people and took their money. So therefore, when he died, he saw Yamaraj, and he was shocked, because his whole life he was following all the rules and regulations. And he said, "What am I doing here?" And Yamaraj said, "Well, you became a party to kill these people, so you're going to suffer now." So therefore, if you make a vow to tell the truth, but if you tell the truth in certain circumstances that will hurt other people, you're not duty-bound to do it. Okay. Now, same thing happened with Yudhisthira. He was asked to say that Ashwatthama is dead, so that they could kill Duryodhana. They could kill Dronacharya. He didn't say it wholeheartedly. He said, "Ashwatthama, the elephant is dead." Because he did that, he had to see his brothers in hell, and he suffered because of that. Right? So we have to strictly follow Krishna consciousness. But if you make a vow and it can hurt someone else, you're not obliged to keep that vow. If it can hurt you, you can keep the vow, but if it's going to hurt someone else, you don't have the right to do it. Hare Krishna. So we'll stop right there. Thank you very much.